Life's not easy.
Not easy. You
Not
can't trust
easy.
doctors either. They're all mixed up. You
really
kidding?
think so, huh?
My proctologist used to be a photographer.
Yeah?
Hey, he took x-rays, told me to bend over and say cheese.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey. If there was ever a comedian who surpassed the one-liner prowess of Henny Youngman, it was Rodney Dangerfield, the disheveled, bug-eyed curmudgeon who got no respect.
We're happy to talk again with Michael Seth Starr, a prolific biographer whose books include Nothin Comes, The Life of Rodney Dangerfield. Michael, welcome back to Amusing Jews.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me on.
How did you first become aware of Rodney Dangerfield, and what were your first impressions?
It was The Tonight Show.
Tell you the truth, my wife and I, we never have sex. Now, we get undressed, we can't stop laughing, you know?
I was probably, in my early teens at that point, and saw him with Johnny Carson and was just amazed at. I thought Rickles with his rapid fire delivery was one of a kind, but Dangerfield was right up there with him. I mean, just one after another, one-liners, very self-deprecating, unlike Don Rickles, and always his humor was directed at himself. Sexual situations sometimes, but it was always with him as the loser.
I got no sex life. 10 years ago, my wife put me on hold.
And I was just amazed at how quickly his mind worked. And anything that Carson brought up with him, he had a joke for. And if it didn't hit, he would come up with something else, 5 seconds later. His whole demeanor was, as you mentioned, bug-eyed, and he was like moving around, and he was mopping his brow, and, I'll tell you, he was fixing his tie. It was just something I'd never seen before. And he wasn't your typical stand-up comedian at that time who would just, even on the Tonight Show would come out, and just sort of stand stock still and look around. He was always in motion, herky-jerky, and just obviously loving what he was doing. And Carson also would fall off his chair laughing. And again, like Don Rickles, he was one of Carson's favorite guests on The Tonight Show.
I was watching a lot of clips of him in preparation for this interview. And you're right, like rapid fire, he memorized so many of his jokes. It's kind of amazing. He had a joke for everything, as you're saying. I started to think that maybe that herky-jerkiness between jokes that's ever so subtle might have been like him thinking about the next joke.
He was ready for any situation, and he would sort of map them out on a board as to when he would tell what joke. Jokes he would tell when he came out to do a stand-up. Jokes he would tell when he sat down on the couch before Johnny spoke to him, and then jokes he would tell as the conversation began. So he did. So I can see that, as you say, Jonathan, that he could have been thinking about the next thing, but he did have it in his own mind, sort of worked out how he was going to come across, and he took it very seriously, particularly the Tonight Show.
Yeah, I think even to this day, that's really the highlight reel is primarily from the Tonight Show.
Yeah, not surprising. Not surprising.
Dangerfield's perseverance stood out to you while you were researching the book. How did he finally break out in his 40s?
I think perseverance is the perfect way to describe him. We can get into this a little more in depth, but he started out as a sort of a stand-up comic / MC in the Catskills, and then he came to New York. He had changed his name. He basically was a stand-up comic from roughly 1940 to 1950, and it never quite worked out for him in that phase of his career. And he had gotten married around 1950 to a singer named Joyce Indig, who he met in the clubs. And I think he realized at that point, his career was he was sort of in neutral as a comic and an MC. he got some write-ups, but not many. He maybe made a couple of $100 on the weekend. Always writing jokes. But he decided to completely shift gears, sort of drop out of show business. And for the next decade, from about around 1950, 51 to the early 60s, he became a paint and aluminum siding salesman here in northern New Jersey, and not far from where I live, actually. And but so perseverance in the sense that he even when he was selling paint, which he called the color, his quote was, was a very colorless business, and when he was selling aluminum siding, he was a funny salesman, but he kept on writing jokes. He was even when he wasn't on stage performing, he was writing jokes. So I think he always had it in the back of his mind that if the businessman life did not work out, he would return to the clubs. And that is exactly what he did in 1960, 61, still working his day job, but eased himself back before live audiences in small to medium-sized clubs in the New York area, for the most part, in that early second phase of his career.
You have some great pictures of him as a younger, kind of failed comic in the book as well, where he looks pretty conventional, almost dapper. And then maybe it took the aluminum siding and the, being a working man to sort of reinvent himself as the working man's comic, because he's very authentic in the way that he presents himself as a disheveled everyman who's, kind of miserable.
There was sort of the early shots of him when he was known as Jack Roy, which we'll talk about. There was sort of like, posed glamour shots. His hair was slicked back, and he was a handsome guy, and he was the one of those looking like that, and the typical glosses that you had that entertainers, singers, dancers, comics at that point had to pitch themselves around. And his image certainly changed when he came back the second time around, when he went from Jack Roy to Rodney Dangerfield. His mode of dress changed, and his whole physical milieu, I guess is what you could call it, was adapted to that persona, and that onstage personality.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe. Dangerfield was chronically miserable, adding authenticity to his self-deprecating jokes. Was that a secret to his success?
I think so. He had a very, very unhappy childhood. His father was a vaudevillian, Phil Cohen, but he took the stage name of Phil Roy, and he toured the vaudeville circuit with his brother, Rodney's uncle, and they called themselves Roy and Arthur, and they were actually fair to middlingly successful as a vaudeville team. They met Charlie Chaplin, and they performed with some big names. But that being said, Rodney was born Jacob Cohen. Jacob never saw his father. He saw him maybe twice a year. His father was always on the road. Didn't have the greatest marriage with Rodney's mother, who was a very, very cold woman. Didn't show Rodney really any love or attention. So he really was on his own. I mean, he there's some quotes from him in the book where he talks about seeing his father for maybe 2 hours, for a visit once a year or twice a year, and they'd go to maybe to Coney Island or into Manhattan. And his father would buy him an ice cream, but they didn't talk much. So he didn't really have a father. And his mother was not the stereotypical Jewish mother doting on him and smothering him and bolstering his career. She was the complete opposite of that. A very, very cold woman. They had a very icy relationship. So he was on his own, and I think he used comedy just as sort of an escape outlet for his pretty miserable childhood. I mean, it wasn't miserable in the fact that they were dirt poor or he didn't have a roof over his head. He did, but there was no love there, and I think he was sort of always looking for that love through his life. throughout his life, and I think he found the love that he needed from an audience and from performing in front of people and a live audience. And they gave him the love that he didn't get from his parents. And he was an only child, so he didn't have any siblings. And yeah, I'm sorry, I take that back. He had an older sister. I'm sorry, he had an older sister who he was not close to. So even that, he didn't really have a relationship. She was 4 or 5 years older than he was. So I think he found his true calling uh, on stage, and the love that he needed, he found by getting laughs through with an audience. I mean, the fact that we're talking about Rodney Dangerfield today is just a testament to how popular he remains to this day, and how popular he was in his time, and how he, even though he was an older comic, he appealed to it's funny, it's an interesting dynamic how he appealed to a young audience as well as people his own age. He came up in a time of rebelliousness, and his comedy was he was sort of a comedy. Somebody in the book, I forget who it was, labeled him as a rock and roll comic. Like the first, he was a rebel in his own way, and sort of an icon to a generation. At a time when you would think an older man, an older white guy coming up as a stand-up comic who was, nearing 50 would be considered an anachronism. But it was the exact opposite. He was like a breath of fresh air. And because he was doing things on stage and talking about things, and his delivery and his one-liners were just so brilliant that it was just like, wow, like where did this guy come from? you know, and that's kind of like it was almost like where did this guy come from because he wasn't well known before. When he really did hit it big on the Ed Sullivan Show, he really was almost, that overnight success story. That one appearance in 1967 put him on the road to stardom.
It's interesting that you're mentioning his rebelliousness because on the one hand, he was hip and rock and roll and all those things you're saying, but also one of the reasons why I think other comics couldn't really imitate him is that his format, his medium was actually very old fashioned, the one liner, which was not what comics were doing in the stream of consciousness, 70s and 80s and all that sort of thing. So he was kind of like a throwback and a throw forward at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, yes, he was the sort of the penultimate stand-up comic. He was up there, firing off lines left and right. Unlike Rickles, who didn't tell jokes, but just picked on people in the audience or picked on Johnny Carson, or whoever he was with. Rodney didn't really do that. I mean, he was sort of like a Henny Youngman on acid. It's like with these one-liners that you figure, wow, when I was born, I was so ugly that the doctor slapped my mother, and then he slapped the nurse for good measure. I'm not in Rodney's voice, but just these he would paint these pictures, and I talked about this a little bit in the book. Like he knew he only had like a certain number of lines to sort of make a little story out of something, and he did that in maybe 3 or 4 or 5 lines, where it was the setup and then the payoff, but you have an image in your head, like when he was talking about this, whether it was making fun of his wife, or or making fun of himself in a sexual situation, or making fun of his own looks, um, making fun of his relationship with his psychiatrist. So he sort of painted a word picture in not so many words, which was a brilliant device and not easy to do. And I think he had such a quicksilver mind, and came up with, he had several trunks worth of jokes that he would just come up with off the top of his head. Um, and were they all great? No. I mean, who can be that great all the time? But the large portion of them were pretty good.
And he started writing jokes obsessively in his youth, right?
I think he said he started writing jokes when he was about 15, which would have put him in, high school or, the ninth or 10th grade. Um, and just kept at it all the time. And even when in that decade of him as a salesman, he was selling jokes every once in a while. And he sold a few jokes to Joey Bishop and some other Phil Foster and some other comics. So he always sort of he kept his toe in the comedy waters, even when he was off the beach and doing something different. But he always kept his toe in the water, and it served him in good stead when he decided to make a second stab at a career in comedy. And that in turn, he had the persona, which led to many, many more television appearances. Um, Mike Douglas, Merv Griffin, when Joey Bishop had a talk show, he was on. Carson, of course, Dinah Shore. I mean, everybody who had a talk show wanted to have Rodney on. And he did make a movie that not many people know about. It was really his first movie called The Projectionist, which came out in 1970. It was a very, very low budget sort of drama/comedy that was shot on a shoestring in Manhattan about a projectionist played by Chuck McCann, who was a very good comic. He played the projectionist in a movie theater, projected all his thoughts. He became different characters in different movies, saving, the girl in distress and that sort of thing. And Rodney in the movie played the really abrasive theater manager.
I'm happy with your attitudes and your appearances. Carpets are constantly a mess. I find numerous candy wrappers and cigarette butts on the floor. Remember, dirt is our enemy. Also, there's a lack of pride in your uniforms. Shoes are not polished. Look at that face. What are you, afraid of a razor?
The movie opened and closed very quickly. It was, showed in drive-in theaters and became a little bit of a cult movie once Rodney became a very big star, and was re-released on television several times. But that was his entree into movies, and then he didn't make another movie for about a decade. He was busy doing his stand-up comedy. He opened his own club, Dangerfield's, on East 61st Street in Manhattan, because he wanted to. He was living in New York, and he had been divorced by this time. Divorced, remarried, and then divorced the same woman. So he opened his club because he wanted to be close to his two children, and he didn't want to travel all that much. And the comedy club, which became a really big success and its lifespan was great. I mean, they closed it in COVID. I mean, it was from 1969 through 2000, through 2020. It was a functioning, very popular comedy club. So, kudos to him for doing that. He opened it at a time where there weren't that many comedy clubs in Manhattan. The big comedy boom with the comedian in front of the brick wall with the microphone, that hadn't happened yet. It did shortly thereafter. Catch a Rising Star and those sorts of clubs. The Comedy Store. But Rodney was one of the first to do that. And he performed at his own club in the beginning 6-7 times a week. And then he cut back once he became too popular. But the club itself stayed open and fostered a lot of careers and was a very well-known place to see and be seen, which is a long-winded way of saying that he had the TV appearances, he had the comedy club, then he had the movies. Caddyshack, which was a box office bonanza and such a classic for a lot of people. It was really his first co-starring role. We discount The Projectionist and we look at Caddyshack, and he didn't even know how to when he first got there and he was shooting his scenes, and this is in the book too. He didn't really know how to act in front of a movie camera, and he expected like he would do his lines and nobody would laugh, and he would say, whoa, what's going on? And Harold Ramis, the director, had to pull him aside and say, There's no laughing on a movie set, or you just be you, say the lines, and you'll be great. And he was, and he adapted very quickly, as fans of the movie know. Yeah, so that was a biggie in his career. Yeah, and I would say that he was 60 already when Caddyshack hit, and that opened up a lot of doors for him in Hollywood that had been closed previously. And so he went on to make Easy Money, which did okay. And it did okay at the box office. It was critically, it did okay too, and sort of people liked it. Some people didn't like it. That was with Joe Pesci.
That's the greatest love in the world, your kids. You can't beat it, all right? That's why you do things for your kids. That's love with your kid. Hey, see what I mean? See that man over there with his kid? That's love. You know what I mean? Look where he loves the kid there. He's bounced him on his knees. Look at that. That's love, baby. I tell you that.
There he is,
Look at that, Nicky.
Oh, thank goodness he's all right. Martin, you're
What's
all
going
right?
on? I'm sitting here minding my business. He jumped on my lap.
Get away from my
All
kid.
right, everybody calm down. Do you have some identification, sir?
And then he had Back to School, which was his biggest movie financially for him, critically, and at the box office. That movie made a lot of money and really, for a time, put him near the top of the heap. His career in Hollywood, he was hot as a pistol for a while. Not a whole very long time, because once he started making a lot of money per movie, he became less picky, and eventually the movies, were like straight to video and Ladybugs and the 5 teners or 4 teners, movies that people probably never even heard of, and for good reason. But he was making money hand over fist, and he was very interested in doing that at that point. And so his he met Natural Born Killers, which was another great movie he was in. It was an Oliver Stone movie, and Rodney had a cameo in that. It was very violent and gory and bloody. And he had a cameo in a scene with Julianne Lewis and Woody Harrelson, where he played sort of a father, a real loud, who's molesting his daughter and beating his wife. And you have to see the movie to get the context of it, because Rodney's scene was shot as Oliver Stone shot Rodney's scene as sort of a parody of an I Love Lucy episode, smack in the middle of this horrifically gory, nasty movie. There was this homage to I Love Lucy, weird homage to I Love Lucy, twisted homage to I Love Lucy with Rodney. But he was very good in that movie, and there was some talk early on that he might get nominated for an Oscar as a supporting actor. He didn't, but there was some talk. So he could always look at that and be proud of that as far as his movie resume was concerned. So, but the interesting thing is they wouldn't let him in. He applied for membership to be a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences, Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and they denied him because they gave some BS excuse. When you do more work, then we'll reevaluate this. But I don't. They didn't take him seriously as an actor. So he was really pissed off at that, and he vowed never to join, and he never did.
How did Jacob Cohen land on Rodney Dangerfield as a stage name?
He went through several iterations. He was Jacob Cohen until he was 19, and then he was Jack Roy from the age of 19 to about 40, 41. He was Jack Roy when he was selling aluminum siding and paint. And then when he decided to make his entrance back into the land of stand-up comedy, when he was booked into his first club, he asked the club owner, because he had played the club before when he was known as Jack Roy, and he was sort of nervous that people would if he was advertised as Jack Roy before his appearance, people might have seen him in that club, and they would say, yeah, he stunk. We don't want to see him. So he basically asked the club owner to pick a name, because he had to be advertised in weeks ahead in the newspaper. And the club owner picked the name of Rodney Dangerfield, which seemingly came out of nowhere, but really didn't. And the Jack Benny radio program, Jack Benny had a character named Rodney Dangerfield who was a cowboy. I don't know where he got the name from.
Get a load of this, fellas. Jack Benny's Christmas party last Thursday was one of the outstanding events of the Beverly Hills social season.
Well,
Among those present were Rodney Dangerfield, the cowboy star, Barney Dean, Stella Buggenhaven.
that's Rodney's leading lady, remember?
There was an episode of the Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, where Ricky Nelson took the name, for whatever in the episode, took the name of Rodney Dangerfield. He was playing a character in an episode.
Well, yeah, only she doesn't know it's me. She's got a blind date with Rodney Dangerfield.
Came out of nowhere, I suppose, for this, because nobody ever heard of it before. But so he became Rodney Dangerfield, and he was moderately successful in the beginning, so he kept the name. And that's it. He eventually legally changed his name, but he was Jacob Cohen for a long time, and then he was Jack Roy for a long time until he finally changed his name. His two children used the last name Roy. They didn't go by Dangerfield. So yeah, I mean that's how Jacob Cohen became Rodney Dangerfield. It was kind of like a lizard shedding its skin for these three different names, and that's the Rodney that we all know and love.
It's interesting. When I was a kid and I got into the history of comedy, I had a golden age of comedy themed bar mitzvah party. That's how into it I was. But I remember like seeing Rodney Dangerfield and his name and just assuming that was his given surname and that it was a Jewish name. Like Cohen, of course, is much more Jewish, but even Dangerfield has like a Jewish sensibility about it,
I suppose you could look at it that way. But he wasn't, he unlike, let's say, Woody Allen in his stand-up comedy, Rodney never, yes, he was Jewish, of course, but he didn't, his spiel and his shtick wasn't really built that much around Jewish kind of humor, like as was Woody Allen or Robert Klein, for instance, Jackie Mason. He was sort of Rodney was the everyman, the self-deprecating everyman, who sort of transcended religion or a certain feeling in his comedy.
Joan Rivers eulogized Dangerfield, saying, "Rodney will always represent what it feels like for all of us to crave a little respect." Is this maybe why he has remained so revered?
I think so. I think the no respect line, Jack Benny called it he told Rodney, "You have one of the greatest catchphrases in the history of comedy." Because let's face it, everybody feels disrespected at one point or another, in their lives. And people could identify with the put upon guy who, was nothing ever worked out, Nothin Comes Easy. The title of the book was before Rodney adopted the no respect line. He often used that line, nothing comes easy. And people could relate to that. And it just stuck to them through his act. And I think that's why he is so revered, because of that no respect line, and everybody feels a little bit of that at one point or another in their lives. I didn't get the respect I deserved, or I'm not appreciated, that sort of thing. And I mean, let's face it, it is one of the greatest. People, no respect, people still use it to this day, or in describing something, or, they'll say, like Rodney Dangerfield, I get no respect, or, that baseball player, gets no respect. Or so it's sort of a ubiquitous catchphrase that has become part of our lexicon. And I think it will be for a very, very long time.
I've even heard it used as the Rodney Dangerfield treatment, not even saying no respect, but when somebody isn't getting respect, you say he's getting the Rodney Dangerfield treatment.
Right. Right. Yeah, and people know. You don't have to say no respect. They know what you mean, and they think of Rodney. They get pops. The thought of Rodney probably pops into their head, and with the with that no respect tagline. So yeah, I mean, it's just it is one of those phrases that that he said I think he told several iterations of the story of how he came to use it, but I think the most believable one was he was working in a comedy club and there were two mobbed up wise guys talking about how they got no respect from somebody else, and he heard that and he used it, and people loved it, and then that just became his calling card for the rest of his life.
Well, we respect you, Michael. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, thanks for having me on. This was great. Always love to talk about comedy and everything else, and I really enjoyed it.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.